But yeah, so typically what I like to do to start out, to make sure, and I learned this the hard way, to make sure that I'm pronouncing both your name and the name of your, your company, your Patreon, however you want to call it. I ask the guests themselves to introduce themselves and to introduce their company or their Patreon. So if you want to do that, go for it.
Sure. My name is Kent Caldwell. I'm based out of Las Vegas, Nevada, and the brand that I run for miniatures is called Void Realm Minis.
Nice. Awesome. Well, so I guess you're going to be showing us some of your process to sculpt models in VR today.
Yes, I thought I'd show you this. I'm for July's bundle on Patreon. It's the second anniversary of the brand. I wanted to do some stuff that was like original and fun for me, and I haven't done a dragon in a long time, so I've actually got this dragon pulled up in VR here that I am pretty much finished with, and I'm kind of in the process of bringing it over into ZBrush for like additional cleanup and keying and stuff. But yeah, we can talk about this sculpt and kind of how far I get it in VR and some of the ways I do that, and then what that process looks like to kind of get it ready for a 3D printer, because the VR sculpting needs a little bit of refinement usually to get it clean for a machine.
Awesome. Yeah, I'd love to hear all about that, honestly.
Yeah, cool. I mean, do you want me to just dive into this whole...
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so...
This whole process? Sure. So like, you could see on the screen the sculpt I've got in front of me, and the really cool thing is that I like about it is that VR feels very intuitive. So when I want to rotate the model, I take my controller here and I'll literally grab it by squeezing the trigger with my middle finger, and now that I've got a hold of it, I can turn it around. I can grab it with both controllers and kind of pinch and pull to zoom in and out. This is like a really dynamic and kind of natural way of working. Of course, I'm in full 3D when I'm working inside the headset, and a lot of cool tools. With a lot of sculpting software, you're typically taking polygons and pushing them around. This is voxel based, so if I come over here, if I were going to start like a new element of this thing, one of the cool things about this is I literally just draw clay in the air, and then when I'm ready, I can kind of carve back against it.
Wow.
I can take some of my other tools and I can actually grab and twist it around and start moving things into place. So, using those techniques like that alone, that clay brush, that move tool, gets me pretty far in making something like this. I really like it because, for example, like if I was going to create some of these like horns or spikes in ZBrush, I might take a cylinder, draw it out, kind of bend it around the curve, flip it over from different angles to kind of get the refined form I want in 3D. But in this software, literally, I mean, I will grab let me get him out of the way. I'll take a sphere like this, and I'll literally just pull with my shoulder. I'm just kind of making a gesture in space with my arm, and that gives me that that shape that I want. And I find that personally to be a really exciting way to work and create sculpts. I find that it makes my stuff feel a little bit more handmade than if I were to make it inside of ZBrush completely. And it just works for me so well, and in inspiring me to make a lot of work and a lot of miniatures.
Awesome. Yeah, I could see 100%. I can see how, actually being able to have a physical representation in front of you in space in real time would totally change the sculpting process. I mean, I don't know a ton about sculpting, either digitally based or in real life. I haven't spent a ton of time with it, but I can absolutely see how this would change the perspective.
Yeah, it's and it's important to note that a software like ZBrush I still use, and it still has some really powerful features. I mean, much more powerful than what this software can do in terms of just like how complex you can get inside of ZBrush. But at the end of the day, like all of these softwares are just tools for the artist, to bring their vision to life. And what I find is that for me, this VR style of sculpting is so much more intuitive, especially for the beginning stages when I'm designing, blocking stuff out, looking at the shape, creating those basic forms, that this is the software for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and so you said that this one that you're working on here is your newest attempt, or your newest version of a dragon, which, I mean, I definitely see dragon elements here, but I think that's one thing that has always caught my attention about your models, is that they do feel very, I guess I'd say like Lovecraftian to me. Like,
I tap into the Cthulhu mythos a lot. Really, I'm a big fan of all that stuff in the deity system of the world. I have a big interest in cosmic horror and things that don't quite make sense. I really like the classic like Kingdom Death monsters.
Right.
Like there's like the Phoenix is an incredible model, that's kind of surreal, and all of the different hidden human components of it. So the like Lovecraft and the Kingdom Death are definitely some of my big influences in terms of kind of the aesthetic and vision that I like to go for. So yeah, even a dragon like this, like, he's got a face in the center of his belly, he's holding onto some strange masks, he's got a mouth up here, kind of with no eyes. I don't really know where that's going, some mouth-like things on the back. But then, some of the hallmarks of a dragon, the clawed feet and hands, the wings, the tail. But yeah, it's always my goal to try to do something fresh, something that's gonna bring me joy to create. And I just have less interest in creating another forest dragon or blue dragon, and more interest in like, okay, what kind of eldritch nightmare dragon can I conjure up, and how can I make this like different and interesting with all that's already out there.
Yeah, totally. I completely get that. And I think that this is an awesome representation of, just like I said, the way that your minis have always or your sculpts rather, have always stood out to me. Because I think it's been about a year or so since I've started kind of looking at different artists' work and putting together like a list of people that I wanted to reach out to. And definitely that's something that your models have always been super unique, in the sense that they don't typically follow a pattern of, this month I'm going to be releasing, this somewhat generic, but my own flavor of this generic creature. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I've seen some really great new interpretations of a classic creature. But I think that your stuff has always struck me as being something that's like, it has a very, I don't want to use my own, I guess I have to use my own terms to describe it, but like a corruptive style to it. Like everything feels not organic in the way that like things are, I guess, very Lovecraftian, which is, the style and the whole aesthetic is things being corrupted by overwhelming forces.
Yeah, I think you want to, like, my goal is to kind of, especially with the darker stuff, is to hit that level of like familiarity with discomfort.
Yeah.
So it's, few recognizable elements, but very strange. Again, I mean, I see a lot of beautiful like stuff done in like the classic vein, and I have a lot of admiration for the discipline that requires, and the design that goes into creating like somebody's new take on like a system of elves or dwarves. But one of the things that I love so much about this world, and what was like this miniature world, let's say, and the further like the ability for indie creators to potentially support themselves, is that I can really chase my vision and what interests me, and I don't have to necessarily like follow the art direction of a board game company that needs something a bit more mundane. Quite frankly, I don't think I have the patience or tolerance to do that, and I have a lot of admiration and respect for people that do. But what I love about this again is that I have the chance to bring people like truly like what's in my brain and what makes me excited about sculpting. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that anytime you can find a passion for what you're doing, it's super important, because, I mean, I've definitely worked enough positions in my life that I wasn't passionate for, and I can tell you that doing something for any other reason other than the fact that it interests you and you enjoy doing it unless you're getting a pretty hefty paycheck from it, you're probably not going to keep doing it for very long. Just because it's just not, it's not something that we're wired to do. But yeah, so I do have a couple of like just generic questions that I always ask artists to kind of get to know them a little bit more. So one of the questions that I had was like, when did you get started with sculpting, and kind of what got you started in it?
I have a background in fine art, and I have some training from the University of Michigan about 15 years ago when I went to school there. And when I was a kid, I definitely saw myself as like, oh, I want to get into painting and illustration and like concept art and that kind of stuff. It was in college that I took a couple of sculpture courses that I think really influenced me. Figurative sculpting in particular, and I took a bronze casting course, which was really awesome.
Wow, yeah.
And I think in that, and then at the same time I was starting to experiment with 3D printing, and when I grew up, my dad had made this like miniature railroad set, in our house that I like always kind of loved that world. And I started in college in my fine art school, I started making a lot of miniature dioramas and things that had like environments with characters in them. And so I was starting to mix like the railroad modeling techniques with the miniature diorama or the 3D printed characters. And then you kind of fast forward a few years, I got a job. I kind of moved overseas for a little bit, settled back here in Las Vegas, and started like refining my fine art practice, and I was doing a lot of these dioramas and stuff like that. And it wasn't until the pandemic that I started looking at this style of sculpting being like miniatures for tabletop games and thinking like, oh, this is really cool. And not only is this cool, but this is like maybe a viable way to support myself. During the pandemic, I had lost my job, so I wasn't bringing any money, and I had to kind of turn my attention with my art towards like, what can I do that would bring me joy, but also that I could potentially monetize. And so I, found this niche in kind of the tabletop world and just sort of ran with it, and found that I really enjoy sculpting this way quite a lot.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've heard one of the reasons why I have these like generic questions is that usually I get very different answers, and it also helps give me some sense of professionalism, which is a complete lie, but I still enjoy doing it. But it's always cool to hear, like, some people will talk about how, they got into sculpting because they were taking game assets and realized that a game asset in its raw form really isn't compatible with 3D printing and needs a lot of work. So it's always cool to hear different people's reasons for getting into 3D sculpting and modeling. So I'm always excited to hear that. Another thing I typically like to ask is, do you play any tabletop games? And if so, have you used any of your miniatures in your games?
That's a great question. I started off in this world having not played tabletop games ever, and I quickly learned that I was very jealous of all these people that had grown up playing D&D as a kid. Because I was super into that stuff, but I just, to be frank, I didn't have any friends or a community or somebody showing me how to play.
Right.
So I felt like, oh man, I missed this like huge, awesome thing. But it's never too late to start. So I started playing Call of Cthulhu actually last year.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that game is and it's ironically, it's not very miniatures heavy.
Yeah.
But because of the themes and monsters that it deals with and the style, it's a bit grittier, and it's definitely not power fantasy like D&D. It's a powerless fantasy. I'm just like some librarian caught up in some insane plot by cultists to
right.
Summon something to take over the world. I really latched onto that system, and I love it. I run games here when I can for friends, and I went to the Chaosium convention so that I could play some games with people this past year. So doing all these sculptures and getting into the miniature tabletop world has led me to pick up Call of Cthulhu as a role-playing hobby, and I am very happy to have discovered it, even at 35 years old.
That's awesome. Yeah, I 100%. I've my main experience has been with 5th edition D&D, which I enjoy a lot. I've been a player. I've DM'd for, at this point, probably going on 8-9 years, which is relatively short compared to some other people. But like you said, I didn't really play it growing up. I didn't have, a large social group. I didn't really have access to, a lot of events that I could meet people that were doing that kind of stuff. So I did kind of miss out on that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, it's never too late to get into it. And that's the really cool thing about D&D and role-playing games in general, is that typically there is going to be some group out there that's playing some version of a role-playing game that you're probably interested in. And it's awesome that you were able to find something that you enjoy, because you're right, like, I don't know a ton about Call of Cthulhu. I've definitely wanted to jump into a game again, with the pandemic and everything, and where we ended up moving to a fairly rural area, so I don't really have a lot of access to those communities again. But Call of Cthulhu is a very different style. Like, it is very much, like you said, it's not, you're not an overwhelming hero that is, gaining levels and eventually going to be able to take on a god. You are somebody who is just as helpless as, any NPC character in any normal D&D session, or any horror movie that you're seeing, a background character they're there, and, but they're just as squishy as everybody else, which is a really cool, dynamic, and a really cool way to move things around. Because, I tend to really enjoy RPGs whenever I'm first starting out, and I can get, completely obliterated by just about anything there is in the map. And a lot of times you have to kind of sneak around, or you have to be very cautious of what encounters you're getting into. And I feel that while I really enjoy D&D a lot, that is something that often gets lost, that feeling of peril, and that feeling that you could get, completely decimated at any point. So, you have to pick all your encounters really carefully. So that's definitely something I'd like to check out for sure.
There are two things about Call of Cthulhu that I also really attracted me kind of instinctively, and I think learning more about the role-playing world, it made sense. The first is that the character sheet may look complex, but the rules are actually very simple. And one of the things I love about it is so elegant is you can actually go a really long time without rolling any dice, or you can have a couple of dice rolls that really inform the story a lot. Now, I don't think that's a system for everybody. I think people that really like the mechanics of D&D and the strategy involved behind that, it's totally valid. But I'm kind of in the theater world now, and I just really love the ability to role play, and without the sense that I have to be bogged down by a super mechanical rule set, and I don't have to let that control me. The other thing I really like about Call of Cthulhu is there's so much pre-written content, and so many one-shots in particular. So, you pick up a game in your mid-30s, and the people I'm playing with, we have families and other commitments, and, adulting things we need to be doing. And it's hard to, we're going to commit, 6 hours a week to a campaign for 2 years. And,
yeah.
And so I felt like my sense was that Call of Cthulhu is very satisfying for one-shots, and that's another reason why we just enjoyed playing it so much, because we don't have to get the same group together every week. We can just do a couple sessions or a single session and still have a good time and feel like we completed a story. So I like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Definitely another really great way where there's that very stark contrast between D&D and other systems like Call of Cthulhu, for sure. And it, again, definitely sounds like something that I would really, really really get into and really enjoy. So definitely have to check that out. So another question that I was going to ask, and you've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but just for anyone else who wants to kind of get into this world a little bit, anyone who's kind of aspiring to take on 3D sculpting, I'd like to hear your recommendations on kind of how to get started, both software and hardware, and then where you think that if anyone's really serious about improving, what they'd go for. I know you kind of already talked about a VR headset, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more on those two ends of the spectrum, I'd love to hear your input.
Sure. In terms of software and hardware, or knowledge with tools, kind of.
Yeah, both. I mean, I know that a lot of people recommend Blender when they're first starting out because it is free, and because a lot of the softwares that people do typically move to are fairly expensive. But I mean, if you have a different opinion, absolutely.
I don't have much experience with Blender. I kind of jumped into ZBrush directly from college. However, the VR sculpting software that I use is free. You of course need to get the hardware and the headset to be able to sculpt in it, but the software is called Medium and it's by Adobe. Now they're updating the software and they're going to have a paid version, but this current iteration that I use, they've said will be free forever, I believe.
Oh wow!
The software itself is free, and I find it so powerful. There's a sculptor in particular, I think his name is Theus Jacobson. He does a lot of supportless miniatures. I think his brand is Perimeter Miniatures. So if you look up his stuff, he's sculpting almost exclusively in VR, and he's an amazing sculptor. And then I don't even think he uses ZBrush for the cleanup and refinement. So I think a good workflow, if people are interested in VR, is to check out that the Medium software, and then to couple that with maybe some Blender so that you can polish, refine, and clean up your forms. But that said, I think it's super important to kind of also get a good knowledge of like what it means to work in 3D, and probably one of the best ways to do that is to actually sculpt in real life, even if that's just for like a workshop or a brief bit of time, and kind of understand how to look at something from all angles, you know, not just left and right, but also like looking at it from the bottom up. So I think human anatomy is like so important to learn, and the skills you develop in developing your knowledge of anatomy just informs so many other things about the way you'll create a wing or a tentacle or, you know, whatever, or a weapon, because there's just so many subtle plane changes to the human form in 3 dimensions. And I am certainly no expert, but I have quite enjoyed the classes and workshops I've taken. There's a book in particular written by Philippe Barreau called, I think it's called just Figurative Sculpture, and it's techniques in clay and plane changes in clay, and I reference that book all the time, just for general like technique when it comes to building form, which is so important in sculpting. I mean, it might sound obvious, but it's quite a thing that's different from drawing and painting.
Yeah, 100%, and that is something that I think that I for sure heard from other artists as well, is that, you know, you might think you know how something looks, and I always reference the joke because it's what always comes to mind, is that, you know, you might think you know how a horse's legs work, but then you go to actually, you know, model them or even draw them in a two-dimensional space and realize that like you don't actually know how they work, because it's weird that, you know, nobody thinks about the fact that horses their legs bend in opposite directions, and it's really weird. And the only reason that I ever think of that is because I know that there's, you know, different examples in like, you know, legitimate movies, you know, where they're either animated or, you know, a certain part of it's CGI and the horse's legs aren't moving correctly. And it's always funny to me because I always notice it now.
Totally. There's so I took one of Scott Eaton's figure sculpture courses, and he spends a lot of time looking at examples of like professionally done movie and video game like art that has incorrect anatomy, and you may not notice at a first glance, but even like the first movie Avatar, and never forget, he's showing us how some of the characters, like the pectoral muscle, like doesn't like glide and insert like properly and overlapping with the deltoid. And he's like, you know, it's a huge movie, and it doesn't necessarily read as a problem for 99% of the population. But, you know, his suggestion is, if you're going to get to that level of detail and finish, that knowledge and the way the forms like overlap and structurally align, even on an alien character, is going to have that same sort of human setup, is really important to understand and have a deep knowledge of.
Yeah, I mean, and that's actually really funny. You did cut out a little bit, though. You said it was Avatar that you were talking about?
Yeah, I think he showed an example of one of the Avatar aliens.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it's 100% true, and it's the same thing also goes with you know, not just looking at a still image, but also I think that I've heard a lot of people, and it makes sense to me as well, that if you want to show action in your models, which is something that's really difficult to do. And I'm always really appreciative when I see it done correctly, or when it's done well, that the action is conveyed, like someone throwing a punch or kicking or throwing a weapon or even just blocking or, in a defensive stance. If you're someone who has any kind of any training that goes along with, martial arts or boxing or sports even, you can really understand, where that kinetic energy is built, where it goes, how it's generated, and the meaning behind an action. So when you see a model that is kicking in a way that doesn't really make sense, they're not holding their weight correctly, it doesn't have to be perfect, but it usually kind of looks weird to anyone who's had a little bit of understanding of how that works. So I think that spending some time really understanding that and really looking at it, and if you can find any reference material that shows a good representation of anatomy in motion, if that's kind of what you're going for, definitely it's an awesome idea.
Totally. I would add to that, as much as it's important to also okay, so I know that I need to, really develop my understanding of action and anatomy and the way the weight's exchanging and stuff. That's not to say, of course, that we should never try some kicking pose until we feel 100% sure that we're going to nail it, because you're not going to nail it the first 50 times you do it. And so you also have to do it, and then you have to look at it and assess it and say, okay, let me move on and get to the next one too. I see people that are kind of afraid to start because, and I'm susceptible to this too. They're afraid to start because it's well, I don't know enough. I'm not ready. I need to get my skills up more. And, learning and growth comes hand in hand with iterating and making and doing it again. I mean, heck, if you look at the miniatures I made during the first month of my Patreon, they're very different. And I have learned how to make a monster for a tabletop game. I think I've improved a lot, in 2 years. I was always a pretty competent sculptor, but just in iterating so much for tabletop, I think I've learned how to create better miniatures for tabletop.
Yeah, and that's an awesome point, and I absolutely don't want to give anyone the impression that I know what I'm talking about, because I don't. I think I may have tried sculpting for.
You do. It's just it's right. The things go hand in hand. It's you have to remember. I shouldn't just make up these crazy kicking poses and not check my references and not study that stuff. But I also should make them and be checking the stuff and keep pushing myself to make them.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, any hobby in the world, you practice makes improvement, which is something that I heard recently and I really like. It doesn't necessarily make perfect, application, research, reference material. But yeah, practice it's really important. The repetition of, doing something, learning how to do it better. 100%. Absolutely. But, yeah. So, I know that you said you are currently using, did you say that you, which headset you were using? I think you told me already. Which VR headset?
The Rift CV1, which is, I've had it since 2016. It's their original launch model headset.
Right.
Yeah, so it's pretty dated, but it's still pretty powerful and gets the job done. So
awesome.
I do enjoy it. Yeah.
Well, I'll see if I can grab a compatibility list for the software that you were talking about. You said it was called Medium. I'll see if I can find a compatibility list for that. I'm sure it's probably given that you're using it on a hardware from 2016. It's probably compatible on most sets after that. But for sure, I'll take a look at the hardware list and put it down below. So if you're somebody who's interested in sculpting in VR and you have one of these headsets, software is free. Give it a shot. See what happens. You might surprise yourself.
There's great Facebook groups too where people post, Medium by Adobe artists, and people post work all the time. Huge variety of stuff coming out of VR, and a lot of people beta testing the new upgraded software right now. I'm not quite ready to jump into it yet. It's still got some bugs to work out. But yeah, there's a really good community around it also.
Awesome. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, I always appreciate that. And it's a good reference as well. Cool. Well, so I guess I should ask a little bit more about what's happening on screen. So you said that you tend to sculpt in VR and kind of, get most of your model planned out and kind of generated, and then you do some of the fine tuning in ZBrush. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So the first thing I did with this model, after bringing it in from VR, is split it into my sub tools here. So, you know, like the tail, the legs, I just went out ahead and separated all of them. Some of it is grouped by layers in VR and some of it is not. So it just, you know, my own process, I kind of know where things are sitting. So I chopped everything up into its component pieces. The wing in particular, the way I built it was kind of messy in VR, so I'm kind of playing, as we're chatting right now, with getting some fresh geometry on it. So I took, if we go back in time a little bit, if I back it up maybe to here, yeah. So I had developed this wing at kind of a low resolution, and I like the overall form and shape, but I think I just needed to get some better geometry. So I'm kind of messing with some, like, I was dynameshing a little bit, and that was giving me, you know, kind of a result like that. But I was thinking for like some of the tips here and stuff that some cleaner geometry might be nicer. So I was running it through a couple of like Z remesher. But then as we were talking, it also looks a little bit too smooth. So I'm going to see if I can remesh it, get it up to a higher resolution, and then kind of muck it up again. Okay, awesome. So you're kind of retexturing it a little bit, and also giving it a little bit more, I don't want to say definition, you're smoothing it out a little bit, but then also trying to break it up a little bit more and make it look, you know, give it a little bit more of an aesthetic that you're going for with that texture. I think so, and I think one of the other things too, in knowing that this is going to be a miniature 3D print, is a lot of these tips here are so thin. I had popped a quick inflate on the whole object to kind of beef it up, and I'm sort of like tweaking stuff like that constantly, and that's one of the things that in sculpting for miniatures for a while I began to notice, like, I don't need these parts to be ultra thin a lot of times. So yeah, that's after the remesh has run its operation. I might even just pop it up a little bit too, and then, you know, then I'll divide it up and start maybe, of course I have my like custom ZBrush setup here with my keys and stuff the way I like, but, you know, I'll come in and start maybe like just like seeing if I need to like kind of accent this stuff more or pull up some areas, or if it would be better to maybe like take just like, I don't know, like a bit of muck to it.
Oh, interesting.
Kind of thing. But I like the basic form, so this is probably something that's going to be hard for me to really like hone in on while I'm talking to you, but
no worries.
Gives you an idea of, like, it give you an idea of like the direction I'm going with it. I think definitely it needs just like maybe even just like, sometimes I like to just take the standard brush here and just kind of pull that stuff out and kind of follow the drips and stuff that I had made originally.
Right.
Yeah, and this is probably working. So I try to kind of stay away from alphas for as long as possible in ZBrush. Adding that texture doesn't really change the form very much, so it's really kind of better to keep and hold back for a while.
Okay, and now just
not all the time. There's exceptions to every rule. Like,
right. I mean, of course. And just to be clear, when you're talking about an alpha, you're talking about the actual texture that you're putting on the very outer edge of the model, rather than, you know, actually changing its form.
Yeah, so like if I was going to start taking like the intensity down, the draw size up, and just like kind of throwing, like, so that's like roughing it up. And, you know, honestly, that kind of stuff like looks nice for the render, if I'm honest. But a lot of alphas, like, they don't really seem to me so necessary for like painting, you know, coming out of a print. Like, I don't know, but then every time I say something, man, it's like, well, then sometimes there are good uses for the alphas, like
right.
making rocky bases and adding some of that texture. So that's just a balancing act
really.
Yeah, I mean, if one thing is for sure, like if there's one constant in the universe, it's that if you say something on the internet, you are wrong, or at least someone's going to say that you are.
Yeah, totally.
So I do appreciate the explanation. I can see 100% what you're talking about versus, making some extra texture on the outer edge of a model versus actually changing its geometry or adding more definition like what you're doing now. Like that's a pretty big difference.
You know who's never wrong in ZBrush though? Michael Pavlovich. So that's another huge tip I have. He's got tutorials for like every single feature it could have. One of the things I like is once you get more advanced, his advanced feature stuff, he does not slow down. So he covers all the basics in plenty of detail, but he also like helps people like me who like just want to get a quick overview of the new features. Like, oh man, his stuff is excellent. I cannot recommend it enough for anybody at any level of ZBrush.
Awesome. I'll definitely throw a link to that as well. I appreciate resources like that because, like I said, this all actually started out close to 2 years ago, I think, because I really wanted to get into sculpting. And unfortunately, life had other plans for me, so I haven't really even started with that yet. But I still enjoy this process of talking to people and getting their take on things and their input and their tips and their references and stuff like that, because not only is it helping me for when I eventually do have time to do that, but also, I hope that it's helpful for other people in the community who are interested about this too.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a lot of this is all digital and online, so it's always nice to chat and connect with people in the community and kind of feel like you're not so alone in the process, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, one thing I wanted to ask about was, so when you switch from VR sculpting to ZBrush sculpting, are you using, I'm guessing you're probably not using a mouse and keyboard?
I'm not. Sometimes I do when I'm lazy just to like move stuff around, but I have a wake-up tablet just under my monitor that I'm, it's translating up onto the screen, so I'm using that for all these strokes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I do know that I've talked to people who exclusively use a mouse, and that is, obviously if you're just getting into this and you don't know it's something that you're going to continue with, then for sure, use the hardware you have. Grab a free tool like Blender. If you have VR and you want to grab that medium tool, anything that's free, go for it. But you don't necessarily have to spend, $100, $200, $300 to get a really nice tablet that you can use, for your sculpting process. However, one thing is pretty consistent that most people that I've talked to have said that it is a pretty important piece of hardware if you're going to be sculpting and you want to have, the ability to improve, that the art tablets are a pretty important investment.
Yeah. Now I'd say like if your goal is to, make like cool characters that you can throw down on your own tabletop, and you're like not trying to make a ton, like a lot of money, or make it your career. I think again, the VR stuff is so underused. I think it's so powerful. You need to buy the headset. You don't need to buy a tablet for that. You can get amazing stuff straight in VR, and you don't really have to take it into ZBrush to do this cleanup. This is just what I'm choosing, to do for this particular model, but you can finish stuff completely in VR. Maybe pop it in Blender just to decimate the geometry and clean it up. But you could do that without having to buy a tablet for sure, and easily get models that bring you joy, onto your tabletop.
Awesome.
I think it's like a really. Yeah, it's a really cool thing about the technology and where we're at with 3D printing and sculpting and stuff. And I always tell like my patrons when people are painting them and stuff, it's like, dude, like most of the time, like you just want it to look good on the tabletop. You don't need to be like intimidated by like these people that are spending like 60, hours to paint like a single banner on some cavalry unit that's like this epic, landscape painting on the banner itself in such miniature detail. Like, you can very quickly paint stuff that's going to look good on your tabletop. It's not going to win any awards in painting competitions, but like, who cares? And I think the same goes with the 3D sculpting. Like, if you want to, bring your own D&D character to life, like the character you've been playing for years, like, and sculpting interests you enough, you grab a headset, you make a rough version. It's not going to win any awards, but who cares? It's going to bring you joy and it's going to look good on your tabletop. I think that's like really awesome.
Yeah. I think that's a really positive way to look at it, and I 100% agree. I think that there's a lot of pressure that's put on people, in just about any hobby, and this also includes just 3D printing it, on its own. When somebody posts something and I look at it, the first thing that I look at, and maybe this wasn't true, 2 years ago or whatever, but it is now. The first thing I look at is, what was their intention when they posted it? If they're posting a picture of a print that they're really excited about, and they're saying, "Hey, this is my first print. I'm really excited. It's looking great. Whatever they're saying about it, it's something positive that they're excited. Then I'm all for that. Awesome. I'm really glad you're excited. You're getting good results. That's awesome. Great for you." And then, if they post a couple of days later, weeks later, whatever, they're asking for help. That's when you can, offer your opinions on someone, for what they're working on. You can offer your opinion on, the model, on how to orient it better, how to support it better. Yeah, exactly.
Up your exposure, pull down your exposure a little bit, but
exactly.
I see patrons post stuff. They printed my stuff, which is kind of not meant for FDM printers, but they'll post it on stuff they've made on FDM printers, and I honestly think it looks really good half the time. Like, it's going to suffice on the tabletop. You're going to use your imagination. You're going to see the character that's there, and it's going to work for you. Like, there's, no need similarly to get hung up in like, oh, it must be this beautiful, perfect print. Yeah. But if you want to get there, you absolutely can get, the help and the advice to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's true for any hobby. And I absolutely agree. I actually started with FDM printing, and I still use them consistently. And I honestly...
They're amazing. They're so useful for so many different purposes.
I almost prefer them, when it comes to larger models, because they are a little bit easier, in my opinion, when it comes to larger models, like, almost the scale accurate, like dragons and stuff. Like an FDM printer is usually my go-to. But yeah, I think that it's really important when you're talking about painting, sculpting, any part of this hobby. When you are doing it just because you want to bring something really cool into the world that's your own imagination, you're making a physical representation for something that's in your head, as long as you're happy with the results you're getting, as long as you enjoy it, if you don't want to improve, you don't have to. If you think the way what you have is, a good representation and you're happy with it, that's all that matters. And anyone who tells you differently is an asshole, and you need to separate yourself from them. 'Cause I used to be really concerned about that when I first started 3D printing, I can see these layer lines, and this thing has a deformation here, and I don't like that, you can see the lines here where I glued it together, but I put it on the table and all my players were excited about it and they freaked out.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
Exactly it. I've got a friend who's a very successful and very prolific artist, in working in like the theater industry, and his stuff is so messy and like basic, and the cool thing is that he just goes and he creates and he paints over and he destroys, and it looks crude, and it works so well for him, and it's inspiring to see that, like, not stop him, but actually help and enhance his vision, that he doesn't get hung up in that stuff. He's a pretty big role model of mine.
Awesome. Yeah, I really love hearing that, and I love hearing, anyone who says, something along the lines of, I like this, it might not be the best, or maybe I can improve, but I like what I have, and like that's honestly what matters. And I'm super excited for anyone who can find that level of joy and happiness with what they're doing, because a lot of times I have a really hard time turning off the voices in my head that tell me what I've done isn't good enough. So I'll spend way extra time on something, way more than I need to try to get it perfect, but it'll never be perfect because there's always going to be one other thing that I have to work on. So, that's the thing that I've taken out of a lot of the hobbies that I've gotten into over the past couple of years, is that, if you're happy, that's all that matters. Now, it's a little different if you're going into, if you're going to try to sell your models professionally, or even as, more on a hobby level, if you're selling your models to somebody else, there are some certain benchmarks that you really do need to hit. And just a, general disclaimer, I'm not an artist, like I said, but I am, I do a lot of 3D printing. And I will say that if you are an artist and you're thinking about getting into modeling to sell your 3D models, the best thing that you can do is print your models, because if you don't print your models, there's a good chance that you could potentially have errors that you don't know about, and you're not going to know about them until you try to sell them and other people print them, and then you're going to find out about them and probably have some people that aren't super happy.
Yeah, and you just understand a lot very quickly about what reads at that level. It also is important to understand that like people are looking at them from overhead most of the time when they're on the table, so there's all these factors to consider, and it really takes looking at the model printed out to start to understand that and improve that way. Yeah, it's a great point you make.
Yeah. So yeah, but I think that it's really important. You know, when you're getting into this, if you're somebody who's looking to, and this also applies to, you know, being a DM, being a player, being an artist. You know, whether you're painting models like you were talking about. You know, I think that all that ever really matters is your level of commitment to it and what you're looking to get out of it. If you're happy with what you have, awesome. You know, go for it. I'm super excited for you, and definitely, you know, keep on rocking and doing your own thing, because that is super important. And yeah, like I said, if you're a DM and you're worried about your story, I guarantee your players are going to have a great time. And if they're not, then, you know, you can talk to them about how to improve that, or you can, you know, go online and find some resource materials. If you're an artist and you're painting your models and you like how they look, that's all that matters.
Yeah. At the end of the day, when we're treating it as a hobby, especially like you said, it should bring you joy first and foremost. So we want that to be the driving factor there.
Yeah. But awesome, yeah. I really appreciate that note. So one thing that I asked earlier, and I forgot to elaborate on, was so I think you said that I know you said you're playing some Call of Cthulhu games. Are you running any of them, and have you had the chance to incorporate any of your models in your games?
That's a good question. Yes, I run the games because I'm like the very enthusiastic one, and I'm just like corralling all my friends to do for me. It feels like, no, but I found a pretty good group that enjoys playing.
Awesome.
I have not incorporated any of my models yet. I have toyed with some projects, just kind of in the brainstorming phase inside my own brain, but I would love to stat some of my more like deity-like sculpts that I've made into like Call of Cthulhu stats, or maybe some of the original, like their minions and monsters into stuff, because I know that in Call of Cthulhu, like once you play a lot of times you're like, oh, I'm running into another deep one, or another what would be another great example, like another Biaki or a Night Gaunt, or some of these classic things, a Moon Beast. And so I think it would be cool to create some sort of like lore or compendium with some of the stuff I've built up to kind of just add more variety for people to basically, you know, maybe they're going to run a pre-written module, but they're just going to kind of swap out or like palette swap the monsters for some of the original stuff. So I have not used any of my games. I just run pre-written stuff with some of my own tweaks, but I would like to one day. I think that would be really fun.
Awesome. Well, I really hope that you're able to, because I think that you know, I feel like that would be a really cathartic experience to be able to bring out your own model, especially if it's something like you said you're statting for yourself. Like, that'd be really cool, you know, to run that in your own game. And it's something that I've definitely had a similar experience, but definitely wouldn't have quite the same impact. At least I don't think so. Where, you know, I'll see a really great model, you know, whether it's, you know, in a Facebook group, somebody else printed, or, you know, it's an advertisement for somebody's Patreon. I'll see a model and immediately it sparks this idea in my head, like, oh, this encounter would go this way, and like, how would this work in, you know, in a world? And like, it, you know, I'm often running with this idea, and then I go and I print it, and then, you know, I can put it on the table, and it's this 2 or 3 week affair where I'm, you know, coming up with an idea for this creature, coming up with, you know, my own stats for it, or, you know, using stats if they're provided or whatever, and then using it in a game and, you know, seeing how my players interact with it. It's just a really, really cathartic experience to spend that time and that energy and make something that is something somebody else created, but making it more unique and making it fit into your story.
One of the things that brings me a lot of joy as a creator is when my patrons say, like, I can't wait to use your stuff in my homebrew games.
Yeah.
I'm going to use them for this. I'm going to make up like all this crazy lore that fits my campaign. I think that's just so amazing, and I'm so happy that, you know, my models can help people do that.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really glad that that's something you enjoy hearing, because I had a suspicion that that's something that most artists probably enjoy hearing, and I do mention that a lot. Like, oh man, like I can't wait to, you know, use this in my game, you know, in a week or two or whatever, and like I can't wait to use this to, you know, to terrify my players or whatever. You know, it's something I very much enjoy. So awesome. Well, I mean, I think we're getting close to the end of our time, but are there any other tips that you'd give anyone who is looking to improve, or anyone who's just getting into this, something that was kind of revolutionary for you, or anything that, you wish you would have known when you were first starting out?
Great question. Just like, I think the points we iterated about, just like, don't let your lack of knowledge like stop you from getting started, and then at the same time, as you're starting and going through the learning phase and making your sculpts, like, just keep learning and keep reaching for those tools and the education. The figurative anatomy is so huge. I can't stress that enough, because it teaches you so much about 3D form. And yeah, just enjoy it. Like, I mean, compared to when I was a teenager, there's so much more in the way of like resources on YouTube and tutorials and guides for Blender, and I can only imagine sometimes like what I might have learned and developed as a kid when if I had access to all that stuff. So, just and like we said, just like enjoy the process and have fun and ask questions and all that great stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that mindset of, going into it, whatever your goals are, make sure that you're enjoying the process. And I think that that's a really important and applicable mindset for any hobby, or really anything that you do, period. It, should try. Maybe there's some exceptions that I'm not thinking of, but I guess maybe if you were like a serial killer, well, they're probably enjoying it too. That gets into a whole weird mindset. But you should be enjoying whatever you're doing while you're working towards a goal. I really hope that you're finding a way to enjoy it, and finding things that you enjoy within that process.
Important to push yourself, but also like our time is short. We need to make ourselves happy and find joy in the challenge and joy in the growth and even the discomfort that we experience.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that a lot. And this has been a really cool experience. This is my first time getting to see and talk to somebody who uses, VR to sculpt, and it's something I'm definitely interested in. So hopefully, if there's anybody else out there who's wants to learn a little bit more about how that process works, or it's something that they want to get into, hopefully this will help answer some of their questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and have this conversation and talk about some of your models. And absolutely, if anybody's interested in seeing more of this work, I will have a link in the description down below to where you can find more models from Void Realm Minis. Definitely recommend it. Super cool stuff. Like I said, it's definitely caught my eye in the past. Really cool, striking sculpts that have some really cool impact, and definitely guaranteed to give your players some nightmares, probably.
Happy to induce nightmares. That's the goal.
That's your tagline. Void Realm Minis. Yeah. Happy to induce nightmares.
We induce nightmares, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate this a lot. This is great.
Yeah, a lot of fun. We'll take care, and we'll be in touch.
Definitely, yeah. I'll chat to you again in the future.